Quick favor, drop your city in the comments. It honestly helps me feel less like I'm talking to a lens and more like I'm actually in the room with you guys. Where are you today?
So, I was 26, broke in that specific way you're broke when you're young and too proud to ask anybody for help. The job wasn't glamorous. I was driving medical supplies between these tiny rural clinics in Mississippi. Middle of the night runs, 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, out in the kind of nowhere where the towns don't even show up on a regular map. You drive through and see a water tower with a name on it, and that was basically it. That was the town. I'm serious. 4 clinics spread across 3 counties, and I was the guy in the beat-up Ford connecting all of them while everybody else was asleep. And look, the truck? God, the truck. It smelled like whoever drove it before me had lived inside it, and also smoked 2 packs a day for probably a decade. The heat worked sometimes. The radio got 1 gospel station, and then just static. But you know what? After a few weeks, that static just becomes background noise, like a fan running in another room. You stop hearing it. You just drive and you zone out, and you let the road do whatever it's going to do. I found the shortcut by accident, which, of course I did. I missed a turn one night, doubled back wrong, ended up on this unmarked county road that wasn't on my route sheet at all. No signs, nothing telling you where it went or what it connected to. But I figured it out fast enough. It cut straight through and knocked almost 40 minutes off my last leg. 40 minutes? When you're trying to get home before sunrise, 40 minutes is everything. I didn't tell my dispatcher about it. Why would I? It wasn't his time I was saving. The road was... Okay, how do I describe this? You know how some places just feel like they've been forgotten? Not in a sad way necessarily, just in a nobody's thought about this place in a very long time kind of way. No streetlights, no mailboxes, no signs that anyone had decided to be out here on purpose. Just flat land and these overgrown shoulders that kind of crept toward the road, and when I drifted a little too far right, I'd hear gravel spitting up under the tires. At 2 in the morning, it genuinely felt like driving through the bottom of something. I don't know how else to put it. Like the dark out there wasn't just absence of light, it had weight to it, depth. I know how that sounds. Just keep listening. About 2 miles in, there was a house. Set back from the road, maybe 100 feet or so. I'd passed it so many times that it had basically become a landmark to me. Just this thing that told me I was 2 miles in and almost through the worst of the dark stretch. It was rough, man. Collapsed porch on one side, wood just completely given up and caved in on itself. In the fog, they appeared the way things appear in fog. Gradually, shapes becoming children, becoming faces as they got close enough. Tyler Marsh arrived first, slightly out of breath the way he always was. Then the Delaney girls, then Marcus with his red backpack listing him backward. One by one they came out of the white, and I walked them across, and they disappeared into the white on the other side toward school. I counted the way I always counted, not out loud, just a number ticking over in my head with each child, a habit so ingrained I didn't even think of it as counting anymore. I was at 21 when I noticed the fog had gotten thicker, if anything. The kind of thick where you stop trusting your own senses a little. Sounds were coming from the wrong directions. A car I heard approaching from the left appeared on my right. I remember shaking my head slightly, the way you do when you're trying to reset your bearings. 21 came out of the fog from the left. A boy, I thought, though the visibility was bad enough that I wasn't certain. Dark jacket. He was a little further back than usual, walking slowly, and I remember thinking one of the kids must have been running late. I walked him across. He didn't say anything, which wasn't unusual. Some of the younger ones were shy. And on the other side, he moved away into the fog toward school. 22. I waited the usual 5 minutes after the last child, checked both directions, and stepped back from the curb. I don't know exactly when it started. Maybe 30 seconds after I stepped back. Maybe a minute. I was standing on the sidewalk, and I ran the count the way I always did at the end of the session. Just a mental confirmation, the same thing I'd done every morning for 9 years. 23. I ran it again. I went face by face, name by name. Tyler first, then the Delaney's, then Marcus. I went through every child I had walked across that morning in the order they had come, 23. I stood at that corner for a long time. The fog hadn't moved. A car went past slowly, its headlights doing almost nothing in the white. I could hear the school bell 2 blocks away, the sound muffled and strange in the fog.
I went through it again, slower this time. I got to 22, the last child I could name, the last face I could fully place. And then there was a 23rd that I could not account for. Not a name, not a clear face, just the memory of walking someone across, a shape in a dark jacket coming out of the fog. I called the school from the payphone at the gas station on the corner. I asked if all the children had arrived. The secretary said yes, all present and accounted for. I asked her to check twice. She did, all 22. I walked back to the intersection and stood there in the fog. I have thought about this more times than I can count across the 30 years since it happened. I have never found a way to think about it that doesn't leave me standing at the same place. The question of who I walked across that intersection and where they went when they reached the other side. The fog lifted around noon. By the time the kids came back out at 3, the sky was clear and ordinary, and the intersection looked exactly like what it was, a 2-way stop on a residential street in a small Ohio town. I went back to work the next morning. I did the count at the end of the session. 22. It was 22 every morning after that for the 4 more years I worked that corner. But I never stopped counting, and I never fully trusted the count again. I liked it. I want to be clear about that, because what came later makes it easy to recast the whole posting as ominous from the start. It wasn't. For 2.5 weeks, it was just a quiet job in a beautiful place, and I was fine. The fog arrived on a Thursday in the 3rd week. I woke up and looked out the cabin's single window, and the tree line had moved. That's what it looked like. The forest had somehow gotten closer overnight. Then I understood. The fog was so thick that the trees 30 feet from the cabin were clear and the trees beyond them were gone. By the time I walked to the tower for the morning check, the fog had reduced visibility to maybe 20 feet and the top of the tower was invisible. I logged the weather conditions and called it in. The dispatcher in Minneapolis said there were no weather advisories for the area and it would likely lift by afternoon. It didn't lift by afternoon. It didn't lift the next day. By the end of the 3rd day, I had stopped expecting it to lift and started accepting it as the new condition of the place. The world reduced to a circle of visibility about 20 feet across, the forest beyond it a suggestion rather than a fact, the tower above me disappearing into white 50 feet up. It was on the 4th evening that I first heard it. I was running the 6 o'clock equipment check, working through the receivers in sequence the way I always did, checking signal strength, logging frequencies, making sure everything was within normal parameters. I got to the old emergency channel receiver. The emergency channel was a legacy frequency that had been decommissioned in 1971, 8 years prior. The equipment was still in the rack, nobody had bothered to remove it, but the frequency was officially dead. Nothing was supposed to be transmitting on it. I had checked it every day for 2.5 weeks and logged the same thing every time, no signal. That evening, it had a signal. I put the headphones on. A man's voice, clear and calm, no static, no distortion, cleaner than most of the active channels, which struck me as immediately wrong because dead channels don't have clean signals. The voice was unhurried, almost conversational, reading a string of numbers. Coordinates, I realized after a moment. Latitude and longitude, read in pairs, a sequence of maybe 8 or 10 locations. The voice read them to the end of the sequence and then stopped. I was concerned. Not frightened yet, but concerned in the specific way of someone who knows enough about how a system works to understand when something shouldn't be possible. I had a map in the cabin, a USGS topographic map of the area, the kind with contour lines and section numbers. After the evening check, I sat at the table and started plotting the coordinates. It took me about 40 minutes, working carefully, checking my conversions. They all marked points in the forest to the north and northeast of the cabin. The nearest was about 2 miles out. The furthest was maybe 6. No roads at any of them, no structures that the map showed, just forest. Dense boreal forest, the kind that hadn't been logged or settled, the kind that had been the same for a very long time. I stared at the map for a while. Then I went to bed. The voice came back the next evening. Same time, same sequence, same calm, unhurried delivery. I listened to it again and plotted the coordinates again to make sure I hadn't made an error the first time. I hadn't. Same points in the same forest. I called the dispatcher again. He said the engineering team had reviewed my log and couldn't immediately identify the source and would continue investigating. I asked if there was any possibility of someone operating illegally on the decommissioned frequency. He said it was theoretically possible, but unusual. He said to keep logging it. I kept logging it. Night 3, night 4, night 5. Same time, same voice, same sequence of coordinates. By night 5, I had stopped being able to explain it to myself in ways that felt adequate. The signal was too clean for equipment malfunction. The coordinates were too specific for random interference. The timing was too consistent for anything accidental. I had started sleeping badly, waking in the early hours to the silence of the fog and the dark and the awareness of the forest outside the cabin walls that I could not see. On the 6th night, I did something I hadn't done before. I stayed in the equipment room after the transmission ended, headphones on, and waited. The voice finished its sequence. Silence. Then, as it always did, it cycled back to the beginning. But this time, before it cycled, there was a pause, longer than the usual turnaround, maybe 15 seconds of complete silence, and then the voice read one more set of coordinates that I had not heard before. Just one, added to the end of the sequence before the cycle began again. I wrote them down. I took them to the map. I plotted the point carefully, twice, because I didn't trust my hands, which were doing something I hadn't told them to do. The coordinates marked the location of the cabin. I stood at that table with the map in front of me for a long time. Outside the window was the fog and the dark and the forest that I had not been able to see clearly for 6 days. The equipment room behind me hummed its usual hum. The voice on the decommissioned channel cycled back to the beginning of its sequence, reading the familiar coordinates in its familiar order, calm and unhurried, the way it had for 6 nights. I called the dispatcher at 7 in the morning and told him I needed to be relieved early. He asked why. I told him about the new coordinates. There was a pause on the line. He said someone would come out the following day. I asked him to make it that afternoon. He did. I don't know what I would have done if he hadn't. The relief technician arrived at 4. I was packed and standing outside the cabin when his truck came down the access road. I didn't explain much. I showed him my logs, showed him the map with the plotted coordinates, showed him the notation about the new point at the end of the 6th night's transmission. He looked at the map for a moment. Then he looked at me. He said he'd look into it. I drove out on the gravel access road and didn't look back at the tower. The fog was still in the trees on both sides of the road, the forest still invisible beyond 30 feet, and I drove through it for 12 miles before I hit the main highway and the fog thinned and the world opened back up. I never found out what was on that frequency.
I called the dispatcher twice in the weeks after and was told the investigation was ongoing. The third time I called, the number had been disconnected. I've thought about those coordinates for 40 years, the ones in the forest, the points that marked nothing the map could show me. I've thought about what was at those locations, what someone or something was identifying night after night on a frequency that had been silent for 8 years. And I've thought about the pause before that final.
He worked that route 4 more times after that. Never saw her again. And I've thought about that so much. Why she showed up for him once and let him go. Why she kept coming back for me and then just stopped after the third time. After I stayed back and she turned and she found me in the dark without even looking. The only thing I keep landing on, and I know this sounds insane, I know how this sounds, is that maybe by the third time I already knew something was wrong. Maybe that changed something. Maybe whatever that was, whatever was happening on that road, it only works on you when you're still willing to believe it's normal. Or maybe she just decided she was done with me. And I have genuinely gone back and forth on those two options for years. Which one is the right one? Which one I'd rather it be? Honestly, I still don't know which one scares me more.
Most nights at that job were genuinely nothing. And I mean that in the best possible way. You show up, you sit behind the desk, you do the audit, you drink bad coffee, you go home. That's it. That's the whole thing. I actually liked it for a while. I was 23, I needed something that paid and didn't require me to be a functioning human being before 9 in the morning. An overnight front desk at a beach hotel was exactly that. Quiet, predictable, safe. I worked there almost 2 years, and probably 95% of it was completely forgettable in the most comforting way possible. But there was one night in October, one shift, and specifically 4 minutes inside that shift that I have thought about basically every day since. Not because of what happened, because of what almost happened if I'd just sat there and done nothing. So, the hotel was one of those mid-sized places right off the coastal highway. 3 floors, exterior corridors on the upper levels, smelled like salt air and pool chlorine basically year-round, no matter what. In summer, it was busy enough. By October, it went quiet. Half-empty parking lot most nights, 1 or 2 cars passing on the highway every hour, just the hum of the vending machine down the hall keeping me company. I'd bring a book, I'd make terrible coffee, and I mean terrible. That machine had no business being in a building where people slept. And I'd do the night audit and watch the clock, and that was genuinely the whole job description. The couple checked in at 12:40 in the morning. I heard the car first. Nice car, quiet engine, the kind that costs money. It pulled into the spot right by the entrance, and the man came in first. Mid-40s, button-down shirt, just this very put-together energy. Calm in a way that wasn't forced, you know? Like he was just naturally that settled. He came to the desk and smiled and said they needed a room for the night, cash, and he set it up front before I even asked, which people do that sometimes, it's not unusual. He put the bills on the counter in this neat little stack, asked for the top floor, asked for something away from the elevator because his wife was a light sleeper. Pleasant, that's the word. He was just really genuinely pleasant to deal with, efficient, easy. The kind of check-in where you're done in 3 minutes and both people walk away feeling fine about it. The woman was standing a few feet behind him the whole time. She was younger than him, pretty, but in this way that looked exhausted. And not just tired from a long drive exhausted, more like the kind of tired that's been building up for a while and has just sort of settled into someone's face permanently.
She had a coat on over what looked like pajama pants and a sweater, like she'd gotten dressed in a hurry, or like going somewhere hadn't really been her idea. She wasn't looking at me, wasn't looking at him, wasn't really looking at anything, just standing there with her hands at her sides while he handled everything. I glanced at her and said good evening, and she gave me the smile that, I don't know how to describe it, except to say it stopped at her mouth, nowhere near her eyes. I gave him the key cards. He thanked me, used my name. He looked at my name tag when he walked in, and he used it when he said thank you. And at the time, I clocked it as just being polite. People do that. They read your name tag and they use your name, and it's a whole customer service thing. I thought nothing of it. They went to the elevator. I went back to my book. The next 2 hours were dead quiet. I did the audit, made my second terrible cup of coffee, read the same page of my book probably 4 times without absorbing a single word. At some point, I put it down and just kind of zoned out the way you do at 3 in the morning when your brain officially stops asking for anything. I was just existing, just sitting there in the quiet, with the vending machine humming down the hall and the occasional set of headlights sweeping across the lobby windows from the highway. Then, the elevator opened. I looked up. I always looked up, just habit. And it was her, alone, still in the coat, still in the pajama pants, but now she had this small bag over her shoulder, the kind you grab when you're going somewhere for a few hours and you need just the basics. She walked up to the desk, and she asked me, quietly, really quietly, if there was a late bus from the area. I told her the first one wasn't until 6. She nodded, didn't say anything, didn't move away from the desk either. She just stood there, and her hands found the strap of the bag, and she started twisting it, slowly. Not like a panicked fidget, more like something her hands just needed to do on their own while the rest of her was somewhere else. And I looked at her, and I asked, carefully, because something had shifted in the air in a way I couldn't name yet, I asked if she needed anything. She looked at me.
Just a beat too long. You know that pause where you can tell someone is deciding something, deciding how much to say or whether to say it at all? That was this. Her eyes were steady, not panicked, not frantic, just very, very focused. Like she was trying to hand me something without being able to put it in my hands directly. And then she said, "If someone comes down asking for me, I wasn't here." She walked out the front door. Okay, so I just sat there. Door swings shut, lobby goes quiet again, and I'm just sitting. And I want to be real with you about those next few minutes because I think the honesty of it matters. I didn't immediately know what to do. I wasn't sure about anything. My first thought was genuinely just, they had a fight. Couples check into hotels and have fights. She needed air. She needed to sit outside and cool down for an hour. That's a normal thing that happens. I ran through all of that. I gave myself all of that. But underneath all of that, something else was running that I kept trying to talk over. I kept thinking about his name tag thing. Which, okay, I know how small that sounds. He looked at my name tag. He used my name. People do that every single day in customer service situations. It means nothing. But I was sitting there in that quiet lobby at 3 in the morning with her words still in the air, and I thought about it again. And this time it landed differently. The way his eyes had gone to my name tag when he walked in, the way they'd stayed there just a half second past what you'd need to just read a name. Like he was doing something more careful with it than just being polite. Like he was making sure he had it right. I sat there with all of it for 4 minutes. I know it was 4 minutes because I was watching the clock. Then I got up and I locked the front door from the inside, put the latch on, picked up the phone and called the non-emergency police line, gave them the hotel name and the room number, and told them I had a concern about a guest. And I stayed on the line. He came down at 3:26, and I need you to understand it was not the same man. Physically the same person, yes, but whatever that pleasantness was, it was just gone. Completely gone, like a switch. What was underneath it was something flat and very still and focused in a way that made the air in that lobby feel different. He walked to the desk and looked at me and asked where his wife was. And it wasn't worried. It wasn't confused. It was the tone of someone who has already figured out what happened and is now just confirming which part went wrong. He saw the latch door. He looked at it. Then he looked at me. And I was on the phone, and I did not put the phone down, and I did not look away, and I did not say one single word to him. I just looked back. My heart was going so fast. My mouth was completely dry. The hand holding that phone was basically just gripping, white knuckle gripping, but I did not look away from him. I want to be clear about that. I did not look away. He left through the side exit, walked, didn't run, just walked, calm as anything, like he was just stepping out for some air. Police arrived, and he was already gone. They got him 2 days later, 3 counties over, pulled over for a broken taillight of all things. The woman, they found her that same morning at a bus station 40 miles away. She'd taken a cab from the hotel. She had $80 on her and the clothes she was standing in, nothing else. And when I heard that, the $80, the clothes she was standing in, I just thought about that money, about where she'd kept it, how long she'd been keeping it, how many times she'd thought through this exact plan in her head, going over it, adjusting it, waiting for the right moment. $80 and a plan and just enough nerve to walk up to a stranger 3 in the morning and say the only thing she could say without saying the real thing. People ask me how I knew to lock the door, and I always give the same answer. I didn't know anything. I had a feeling I couldn't prove, and a woman who couldn't say what she needed to say out loud, and 4 minutes of sitting very still trying to decide if I was being paranoid. That's it. That's the whole heroic story, 4 minutes of being unsure. What I don't usually say is the name tag part, because here's what I understood later, once I had enough distance to think about it properly. He didn't look at my name tag to be polite. He looked at it because he was the kind of man who collects names, who keeps them, who understands that knowing someone's name is a small thing that costs you nothing and you just never know when it might come in useful. She got out with $80 and the clothes on her back.
I think about her a lot. I think about what that walk through the parking lot must have felt like. No shoes, she told the cab driver she'd left in a hurry. Walking through that dark parking lot at 3 in the morning, not knowing if I'd done anything, not knowing if I'd just watched her leave, not knowing if the door was latched or if the phone was picked up or if any of it had worked. I really hope she's okay. I mean that in a way that doesn't feel like a nice thing to say at the end of a story. I mean it like I genuinely need her to be okay. Somewhere ordinary, somewhere quiet, somewhere he doesn't know the name of.